It's May 8th, Tuesday, 12 o'clock. Time to get started with our Ask an Ombuds OEO lunchtime webinar. This will be our last one of the year. We are recording this webinar to share it later, and we will post the materials online. As you join, if you have questions that come up, please go ahead and share them in the chat. We did receive one question and have a few tips to share as we get close to the end of another school year. But again, please feel free to use chat and Q&A as we get going, and we will get started. My name is Rose Spidell. I'm one of the Education Ombuds here at the office, and we'll share some information as we go forward. Here is a brief overview of what is OEO. We are a state agency created back in 2006 to share information with families and schools, help resolve disputes when they come up in a collaborative approach, and do workshops, participate in policy work groups, and aim ultimately to try to reduce opportunity gaps in our public schools. So these Ask an Ombuds Q&As are an attempt to share more information about our state school system generally, how it works, what are avenues for addressing concerns, and resolving problems when they come up. So again, if you will share your questions or comments via chat or the Q&A functions as we go along, happy to take questions on the spot, follow-up questions as they come to mind. The first question that we had submitted for this month was actually one about long-term vision and thinking kind of big picture about what a day looks like for students in our public schools, specifically around the time allotted for recess, lunch, physical activity. This is something that comes up periodically. Questions come to our office about this, and indeed, the person who posed this question seems quite familiar with the issue. Chances are more familiar than I have been previously, but this question prompted some exploration of where things are now. The question comes from long-term visions shared by our current state superintendent of public instruction, that's Chris Reichdahl. It's an elected position. He heads our Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI. And they are responsible for quite a number of things and are essentially our state education department. They allocate funds to school districts. They provide a lot of technical assistance. They develop rules to give further detail to laws relating to schools, public schools, and education. This question references his long-term vision that he shared, describing longer days, more time in school for K-8 that would include research-based lunch and recess periods. So the person wonders, where can I find research that will kind of pin down or help describe what's an optimal or appropriate period of time for breaks for the different grade levels, elementary school, middle school, high school, and also notes that there's currently a requirement for 100 minutes a week on average for kids in K-8 to receive physical education. How is this being implemented? How is it being enforced? In reference that one elementary school currently is offering 40 minutes a week instead of the 100 minutes a week. So what I've done here, as is not uncommon when you ask a question of an ombuds, is that there's often not a simple, quick answer. But I've put a link here in the slides, and we'll go ahead and follow it and see if my screen sharing works this way, because I think there are places to track down more information about this. First of all, where to find that research and what's going on with the current requirement. So if we click on this link, it's going to take us to OSPI's webpage. Again, OSPI is our state Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. It's headed up by the state superintendent, who's currently Chris Reichdahl. OSPI has a lot of different departments, people who are working on specific content areas, English language arts, math, social studies, people who are working on other issues like equity and civil rights. They have a department that addresses school discipline, and indeed, fortunately for us, they have a group that looks at health and physical education. They regularly update with new materials, and here on this landing page for health and physical education, we'll see that they have information for educators who want to expand their professional learning, for assessments. What kind of assessments are schools using? Because our state does have some standards developed for health and physical ed. And there's information about laws and regulations and graduation requirements. A link to learning standards that have been developed And coming soon, it looks like they'll have a health and PE cadre, which I anticipate will be a group of professional educators that all share an interest in this area, that can come together, share best practices, ideas for increasing access to resources. Today, to answer those questions about access to recess, I followed this link for laws and regulations. One of the helpful things that OSPI often includes on their website are links to the laws or rules that govern a certain issue in our public schools. In the question we had, it asked about, what about this 100 a minute per week requirement? And who's enforcing, or how's that being implemented? Now, as we look at this page, what I notice is, number one, it does reference some RCWs. Those are our state laws, Revised Code of Washington. Down here under physical education, it tells us it has a link for physical education in grades 1 through 8. If we were to click on that, it took us to a law, a section of the website that tells us in grades 1 through 8, they should get the physical education as prescribed by rule of the OSPI. Well, so then we want to go back here, and what is the rule about that, right? And here, up near, closer to the top, we have something that's going to pin that down. It says minutes in physical education for grade school and high school. So we're just checking, and look at this. It does explain that an average of at least 100 instructional minutes per week per year in physical education shall be required of students in grades 1 through 8 unless waived. And then high school, it's 1 credit course or its equivalent shall be offered. So there is often this question, all right, so we've got that, we know that that's there, but what about implementation? What about enforcement or accountability on that? Well, when something is important enough that people are putting attention to it and asking those questions, sometimes you get next some follow-up. So I noticed that there's now an annual data reporting of physical education programs. This takes us to the section of the state law that explains there's now an annual review that districts are going to be asked to do. It's going to start in the 18-19 school year, so it'll start next year. They'll be conducting a review of, how much time are students getting in physical education, how many students are completing it, the average number of minutes per week, waivers, questions about indeed whether students are excluded from physical education for disciplinary reasons on a pattern, as a pattern, whether their curriculum addresses the learning standards developed by the state, whether they routinely modify and adapt their physical education curriculum. As I'm looking at this, and if I'm trying to dig in and engage with this question, I have some understanding of what the law currently says, and maybe I'm wishing that the law was more robust or added some more. I'm concerned about implementation. One of the things I take note of is this little link near the bottom of it, and it has a highlighted number here, 2017, and it's Chapter 80, Section 1. That tells me that this law that we're looking at, not surprisingly because it doesn't start till next year, is actually pretty recent. It was passed just in 2017. I can click on this. This is our Washington State Legislature page that we got to by following OSPI. I can click on this, and it's going to take us over to the law itself. And this law, it just kind of describes what we now saw in that page on the legislature, and it says what districts are going to have to collect and review. It doesn't really tell us why did the legislature pass this law? What were they hearing that made them think that this was important to act on? So I'm going to go back to this, and I know, actually, let's click on that again, because I want to track that down. I want to figure out, are there other people working on this that I could connect with, or I could share that information with the person who has questions and concerns? Are there people that had information about how things were going well or not so well, and it made them want to persuade the legislators to take further action on this question of PE? Remember, again, they've already said we want schools to offer a certain amount. OSPI put that down into minutes, and now they're coming back and saying we want schools to go back and look at how much are you actually offering, right? So there's interest in this, and they're pushing it forward. I'm looking at this, and I see up here at the top that what passed was called Substitute House Bill 1235, and it passed in the 2017 session. Again, what I want to know is, what was the history of this? And so with those two pieces of information, I can go to the Washington State Legislature webpage. Here, I've already gotten us to where we were going to go, but what I started with on the left is bill information. As bills are being considered by the state legislature, they each get a number, and we're putting in the bill number here. We're searching for the 2017-18 sessions because that's when it was passed, and I hit search. This takes me to a page that has information about the bill history. It tells us when it was introduced. It tells us who sponsored it, the legislators who sponsored it. But what can be helpful for someone who's interested in this issue and wants to pursue it or find out more about where things stand is when a bill has gone through a fair amount of process, you get different pieces of information that share some of that history. And that is where we look under the bill reports. And the bill reports a lot of times give a summary of what's the current state of the law, what's proposed to be changed, and then in many instances it'll have some area of testimony that will let us see why people were proposing this. So I looked at the Substitute House Bill Report, and this allows me to check in and see a little bit about what the bill would do. It says what happened in the committee. It talks about the background. It again explains that it's already required that students get access to PE and that high schools need to do this. It describes the learning standards that were developed through OSPI. And then it also notes that there is a data governance group at OSPI that's collecting information more and more to help us take looks at our overall system. It describes what the bill would do, and then it does have public testimony summary. And it talks about the importance of activity, the way that that helps students engage more academically when they come back from a break. And then it does list the people who testified. So in this case, for the person who submitted the question, if they haven't already, this might be a collection of folks to try to reach out to, make some connection, find out, what have you got? Do you have some of that research? You can also circle right back to OSPI and say, I see this reference to research-based time periods. Can you help direct me to that? Now, who would you call? You could call their general number. I probably also would go to their health and physical education page. Oops, excuse me, I'm clicking around here. And find the contact person for OSPI's Health and Physical Education Department. They can probably get you started. There's some additional people listed here, groups that testified on this, who might have some additional information and where things go yet next. As with many things, and you're looking at systems change, implementation, follow through, it takes some time, right? It's a commitment where you're looking long term. And so at the state level, again, if what the law said is we want people to be collecting this information so that districts will be ready to share it. They'll have that information starting in the next school year. So here we're coming back to our question itself. By the end of next school year, each school district should be able to give a summary of how much time kids are accessing physical education. Do we have the infrastructure we need? As a person, any person can ask a school district to share copies of that information that they gather. That would be public records. And so each school district is a public entity, and so they make public records available. Certainly, you know, if there's a group within the school district, someone is going to be charged with doing this sort of survey and finding out who that is, connecting with them, talking about what you've seen. If a school district is finding, oh, indeed, look, we've had some elementary schools where we've only been able to offer half of what the rules say we need to offer, then we're going to need to do some problem solving, some brainstorming, some thinking about how we can increase that time so that everyone has access that they need. So there's possibility here for advocacy and engagement at the school district level with administrators at the district, at school buildings, and ultimately with a school board who makes a lot of decisions for the school district allocation of resources, siting of buildings, questions about what gets worked on first. And also at the state level, as we can see, people have definitely been advocating to make sure that attention on recess, physical activity is not lost, even as there continues to be attention on academics, reading, writing, and math, and the assessment scores for that. One of the hopeful things here is, again, that survey that districts will be doing includes looking at making sure that kids are equally getting access to that. Do we have generally physical activity time allocated, but are students being cut off from that for one reason or another? Are we ready and able in making those modifications and adaptations that are needed so that students with disabilities are able to participate? So a lot of good questions being asked. I hope the person who submitted this, if there's follow-up questions, additional information that would be helpful, please do share. I think a lot of times these questions just give us opportunities to refresh and learn more. If there's one thing that's certain about our education laws and rules and practices, is that they are in regular flux and change, that there are new ideas, new questions being asked. And so I think it helps first find out what are the rules, what do they say now? What would I like them to say? Are there other people working on this, and how to connect those dots? Who's making the decisions? Sometimes it's at the school building level, sometimes at the school district level, and a lot of times decisions at the state level can certainly influence that. So again, I encourage, as you come up with questions, never hesitate to start with OSPI. They have a lot of good information available and can answer questions, potentially help identify that research that they've been able to look at or look for, and connect you with other people working on the same issue. Indeed, as the next slide, I put in a link. OSPI recently has been putting out a request far and wide to try to get input from families all over the state about what is your priority for our public schools. What do you think that should be the priority issues and areas for budget commitments? And so here's the link. If you click on it, you're going to see, again, it's going to take us to a page on OSPI's website that has a survey. Take the survey on what are your priorities in public K-12 education. And they have made this survey available in multiple languages. We know that there are students and families that speak multiple different languages in our public schools, so this gives a chance for a lot of different folks to weigh in and add your voice to that, that conversation. So as we have taken the question about PE and recess and used it as a jumping off point to review a little bit the structure of our state education system, remembering again there's our state Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and at each school district level you'll have a school board that's going to make decisions about policy. You'll have school administrators at the district level and building level administrators who are implementing that day to day. In all of those levels, there are opportunities for involvement and to give your voice at the state legislature as well. And we didn't touch on in this question, but the State Board of Education, which continues to play a role in especially graduation requirements. So if those prompt questions, follow-up thoughts, please do share by chat or Q&A. In the meantime, if you think about those, if things come up and you'll share them, I am going to go on. I gathered just a few tips. We are in May, and the end of the school year is quickly approaching. I know people in schools are quite busy, families are busy checking in, seeing how students are doing with their grades, their classes, students with IEPs, individualized education plans, their families and teachers are working on seeing if they can plan one more meeting before the end of the school year, making sure their goal progress reports are up to date. So there's a lot going on. For some students, this is the last of their school semesters and they're getting towards graduation. For other students, you might be looking at your last semester in middle school and starting to think about what's next in high school. It's never too early to check in on what is expected as kids get towards graduation. What will they need to do to complete their high school and get a diploma? That is another area where the requirements, the expectations, the alternatives, and the options have changed year to year. And so it's one of those things where I I tell families sometimes when they ask a question, for myself, I never expect myself to have memorized all the rules or to know them off the top of my head. And I try to remind myself, even if I think I do, that it's better to check because even if I knew what was the rule last year, it may have changed again. And that cannot be more true than in the area of graduation. We've got, again, I think a great source to go to is OSPI's website. They've developed a lot of materials and they continue to develop them and work to make them available in multiple languages. As a starting point, they identify 3 major things that are required to get to graduation. It's earning credits, passing state tests is currently still a requirement, and completing a high school and beyond plan. If you are a person supporting a student who's in middle school and getting close to high school, that conversation about high school and beyond plans should already be starting. Indeed, now students will be starting those in middle school and thinking about how they're going to work during those years of high school to get themselves set up to what they want to do afterwards, so that completing high school is a goal for everyone, and thinking about what comes after that, that it is a step along a path. So that's a piece of it. Earning high school credits, that has increased in the last several years. So students will be looking at earning 24 high school credits with some options and alternatives here and there. Those credits are required in different subject areas. So again, checking in, what are the credit requirements? What are the subject areas? This is another area where it's helpful to understand the structure of our system. The state sets a minimum of credit requirements across the board. School districts are able to set higher credit requirements than that. So they can go above the state minimum. They need to give opportunities for students to meet those credit requirements. One of the requirements for graduation in our state is to pass a state assessment. And we have a question that's come in that relates to those state assessments and that requirement for graduation. As we go into that, it's a question about assessments. When a student takes those assessments, currently it's the Smarter Balanced assessments, and I think we still have some students who are taking end-of-course exams. There's a pass level for 10th graders on our Smarter Balance that if they meet that, then they meet this assessment requirement for graduating from high school. And they earn what our state has called a Certificate of Academic Achievement, a CAA. And that is one piece of the requirement to earn a high school diploma. So again, they take this assessment. If they pass it at the score that's set for graduation, for 10th graders is when they usually have taken that, then they will meet that component of the graduation requirements and they will earn a Certificate of Academic Achievement. For some students with disabilities, if they have an IEP, an Individualized Education Plan, let's say you have a student with a learning disability in mathematics, and that learning disability in mathematics means that as they reach high school grade level and age level, they're still going to be working on learning those mathematic concepts that are at a lower grade level. They will not have yet caught up to the high school standard because they have a specific learning disability in that area. Their IEP team can look at that and say the appropriate passing level for this student to meet this graduation requirement is going to be something different. We're going to set it based on something that's still challenging for them, but it's reasonable in light of the disability. And they can set that up to pass either at a different cut score, so a level 2 instead of 3 for that 10th grade test, or at an off-grade level assessment. And for some students with significant cognitive disabilities, they might take an alternative assessment. If a student with an IEP has an IEP team that's decided they should have a different level for meeting that graduation requirement, what they earn is called a Certificate of Individual Achievement, a CIA, to meet that graduation piece of the state assessment. So the CAA, Certificate of Academic Achievement, is the general high school level. CIA is an individualized score, Certificate of Individual Achievement, to meet the assessment. So one of the things that often, language and semantics become an issue often in education world. And some people will say, okay, so does that mean it's a different diploma or a certificate of completion. What our state says is that whether you earn a CIA or a CAA, you are earning a high school diploma. There's one diploma with different assessments to meet the overall graduation requirements. I've taken us here, yet again, to OSPI's page because they provide the information about what are the current graduation requirements, especially around this assessment issue. What are assessment graduation alternatives and requirements? They have information here, and they will link us to CAA and CIA information. If we check on that, let's see if we can follow the right one. Ultimately, the question is going to be, for some students, right, if they take the Certificate of Individual Achievement, and here's the question, I know you're wondering, how can I take so long to get to the question, is will that distinction of CAA or CIA be noted on the transcript? After all of that, I am a little bit reluctant to say very clearly yes, although I do think that it is indicated as a CIA on the transcript. I am not 100% sure, and so right now we are on the page from OSPI that describes a little bit more about the CIA options, Certificate of Individual Achievement. To track down a really firm answer to that, what I would do is two things. One, I would look at this Contact Us link over here on this page. It would take us to a contact person, and indeed they even have an online question opportunity to just put that in and say, is the CAA or CIA distinction going to be noted on the transcript? If you want to do a little more research before you check in, OSPI has another resource that we end up referencing around this time of year, which is they have an FAQ on high school transcripts that can answer some of that information. It looks at grade point average issues, withdrawals from classes, things like that. And you might be able to find it there. So again, an FAQ on high school transcripts, or putting in a question right here directly to OSPI, can that distinction be noted on the transcript? Now, you might be wondering, why would that question come up? Does it matter? Well, the question comes up because it's an issue of equity and making sure that, for example, there are rules that if a student with a disability receives accommodations, but they're taking the same content class as the rest of the students, it would not be indicated on the transcript that they're receiving accommodations. That those accommodations are something that they receive as a right to access, equally access our free and appropriate public education. If they're receiving those accommodations, you don't call it out on the transcript, because calling out accommodations could call out and unnecessarily identify that this is a student with a disability. And generally, people with disabilities make that choice about disclosure or not. Now, if there is a different class and there's a different title for the class, or a different program, then that is a distinction, and generally those classes are labeled what they are. And that's why I do believe that a CIA would be indicated on a transcript, but I would definitely encourage you to double check and go straight to OSPI, contact them, check their FAQ on the transcript FAQ. So that brings us back here. Let's see if we get back to our slideshow. One of the things that you can use as a resource as you're going through this, we didn't link to that page yet, but OSPI has developed graduation toolkits. And this, again, just a reminder of how frequently these things change and how complicated they can sometimes seem, is that there's a separate toolkit for each graduating year for the next 4 years. So if you have someone that's getting close, or if you have someone that's just entering high school, I'd encourage you to take a look. Follow this link to graduation toolkits, or you can Google it. I will follow it right here. Again, they have a toolkit for each of the class of 2018, 19, 20, and 21. They are promising translations available soon. We know that they're doing making that available more and more for different resources that come out. And that will include information about dates, graduation requirements, testing requirements, credits, alternatives, waivers, etc. So definitely check that out. And they have an email for questions to go straight there. Also, let's see if we go back to our slideshow and we continue to the next slide. High school counselors can be key people in trying to find out what's there, what's the option, what are those graduation requirements. The other reason to always check not just with OSPI, but also with your local high school counselor is, again, looking back at our public education system, remembering that in ways people call it a local control system. There are definitely rules, minimum requirements, standards, etc., that are set at the state level. Many also set at federal level, for example, anti-discrimination laws and expectations under the new Every Student Succeeds Act. At the same time, there are many issues, decisions, and choices that are made at the local school district level. And so, as with, again, credit requirements, our state has set a minimum of 24. School districts can require more. They have to make it possible for students to earn more, but they can require more. So always check in about your local requirements and your local options. This slide where I moved to that includes a reference to the high school counselor, again, a key point of contact, kind of does some, oops, excuse me, I clicked in the wrong place. It gives some tips and some potential starting points if you've got a student who is struggling to meet those credit requirements. Maybe they are at risk of not passing a class. Maybe they have already failed one or more classes. And with the 24 credits, there's not a ton of wiggle room for students to take classes over again and still complete high school and those credit requirements within the 4 years. So what to do if you've got a student who is struggling with those high school credits, struggling with the classes, maybe they've already failed or they're on course to not pass a class. If you've got a student behind the usual schedule for credits, how to get to graduation, there might be different options. One increasingly available, but not everywhere, are credit retrieval options. Sometimes schools have connections with online programs that allow students to try again at a class that they have not passed, either during the school term or during summer. Some schools offer those for free, some for certain grade levels, some offer them at some cost. Schools also know, and students that are not on track to finish within 4 years can take more time. So our state allows students to continue in public school up until they're age 21 or until they graduate. So they can take some more time to earn those credits. There's also an option if families are able to pay for courses to retrieve credits or to jump ahead if it's possible. There are different courses available, again, online options and other options. Here on the materials, I've included an asterisk and really would encourage, make sure, first check with the school, with the district to get approval for a particular course before jumping in, because a lot of school districts have a policy that addresses whether or not they will accept transfer credits from other programs or classes like that from outside the district. And a lot of times they will, but they would require pre-approval. And so that is not very helpful if you've already paid for and taken the class and the policy required pre-approval. So again, if you're thinking about trying to get some extra credits over the summer, taking some programs, some classes online, check now with the high school counselor. If you're not able to get that clear answer there, check with the principal or up to the school district office. Check in advance if you want to get those extra credits that are going to come from an outside source and you want them to transfer onto your high school transcript and your credit requirements at your district. So those are some options. A lot of times, you'll find that you're trying to troubleshoot through multiple options. Sometimes none of them feels quite right, taking extra credits over the summer versus taking extra years. It can be challenging, but I think a lot of times, again, high school counselors are a great first point of contact to try to troubleshoot this. What if you're a student with a disability who needs this option and you also need accommodations in order to be successful in a traditional classroom setting or even an online program? In that case, it would be important as you're getting ready, whether it's to participate in a school district credit retrieval program or one of those other programs, is to talk about and address needed accommodations as you go in, so that you'll have a greater likelihood of success in that credit retrieval program. So those are some things. Again, if you're working towards high school graduation, check what those requirements are. Check out the toolkit. Think about the assessment requirement, think about the credit requirements, and the high school and beyond plan. The one that brings the smile to my face mostly is that high school and beyond plan, because I think it's a starting point where families can be talking with their increasingly not so young kids and getting closer towards high school and thinking about, what do you want to be ready for after high school? You don't have to know in detail and have a specific plan, but be thinking about it. Start imagining different options or routes that you might want to take, and how will you get ready for that. Here, our next slide just brings us back to refresh on those assessment alternatives, and this looks at for students with IEPs. If you are in that situation where you have a student with a disability who has an IEP, an individualized education plan, and it does not seem reasonable, or they would not be able to meet the high school cut score for the reading or the math or the writing graduation assessment, the IEP team should get together and have a conversation about what should be the level at which they could earn their graduation, their certificate of individual achievement, and their high school diploma. There's some guidance. Again, it takes us back to OSPI's guidance, but this guidance really reflects very individualized considerations. I would really encourage, as teams start to look at and think about the choices around the state assessments for kids with IEPs, be really transparent and open about that. Sometimes I think there's confusion. And so, for example, a parent of a student who has an IEP, who, again, maybe this student really struggles in math, or you have a different student who does well in math but really struggles with reading and writing, they might be envisioning a path for this student that takes them through community college and into a route for a career. But knowing precisely where that student is at, even with the content area that they struggle with, can be key to figuring out realistic pathways going forward. So for example, if the IEP team simply says, we'll have them take an off-grade level assessment to earn their certificate of individual achievement, that's an important piece of information, but what you want to be clear is, what grade level are you talking about? Is that a grade level of grade 4, or is it grade 7? Well, those are fairly distinct, right? You've got a lot of growth in those grade levels. So be clear about where that student is at. And you also need to be clear about what the decision has been and indicated in the student's IEP. One of the things that has shifted recently with the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, is that all students need to participate in the state assessment. The question of what is going to meet our state requirement for graduation becomes a separate question. So as you go to again, OSPI, there's multiple different routes for information on this, but we're thinking about students with IEPs, what kind of state assessments they're going to need for graduation. But there's also a question about what kind of state assessments are they going to be required to attempt. And so here I am showing a page on OSPI's website that looks at graduation alternatives, and it looks specifically at off-grade level assessment on regular or alternate assessment. One of the things that it explains here is that the off-grade level assessment is an approved alternative to meet our state graduation requirement. And they can, if the IEP team determines that's appropriate, they can use that. They'll get their certificate of individual achievement. They'll be set up to earn their diploma if they also do the required credits and high school and beyond plan. However, there's information here. It says, those students will still be expected to participate in on-grade level assessments required for federal accountability. So you might be hearing for students, we're going to need them to have them take the 10th grade math assessment. We know that they may not pass, and then we can have them take the, for example, 5th grade assessment if that's more appropriate to their current math abilities. By passing the 5th grade, they can earn their certificate of individual achievement and their graduation requirement, but for federal accountability, they would be taking also the 10th grade level. I can imagine that this is going to create confusion, questions, wondering about, what does this mean for the student themselves as they're sitting down for those tests. Really encourage you to ask questions, not be afraid. If you're a parent, ask those questions. If you are someone from the school, it's probably one of those times you'll want to be able to take some more time, maybe be ready to pull up this information from OSPI's website, have your laptop there, pull it up, look through it together. And again, don't be afraid to follow that Contact Us link, check in with OSPI. What does this mean? It's something different. You'll both call together and get that information about what's the expectation for students and how to best support them. All right, so we've talked about graduation requirements, assessments, different assessments for students with IEPs. You'll note that I have today gone back and forth between the slideshow and some different pages, especially on OSPI's website. It is a place for good information. So now as I take us back, and we had, let's see, we talked about graduation assessments, we talked about credit retrieval. Next, I have some tips for digging in a little more generally if a student is struggling academically. Before I jump into this, I just want to pause again and invite you, throw in a follow-up question, ask a brand new question. You can use either the chat feature or the Q&A. We're recording, so you can come back later and check out what we covered in the beginning. We will post these slides later, and we'll post the recording, so you'll be able to follow the website navigation that we've done to the different pages. So just before I go into this slide on, tips what to do if a student is failing classes or struggling academically, invite you, if you have questions, thoughts, tips that you want to share, chat and or Q&A would be an option to share those. All right, so having talked a bit about graduation, right? And a lot of times we're pretty focused on that. And a lot of times we start to focus on that when we get kids in 9th grade. We know now too that the high school and beyond plan, which is one of the graduation requirements, is now something that's going to start in middle school. So if you are supporting a middle school student and you haven't yet heard talk about that high school and beyond plan, don't hesitate to check in. You can do some research on that. There's also sometimes certain classes that students regularly take in middle school they're earning credit for that are required for graduation. One of those is Washington State history. Some students in middle school also take algebra. They get that credit under their belt. Another opportunity for students around in some districts that have set it up is that students can do competency credits for world language by taking a test. This is an opportunity especially valuable, for example, for some students who are recent immigrants. They might have great fluency in a language other than English. They might be getting settled and working on those additional credits, but the world language competency exams can give them an opportunity to demonstrate their abilities in their primary language and earn up to 4 high school credits for that. Again, circling back to that 24 credit requirement, it now includes 2 credits for world language, unless a student creates a personal pathway. So that is an option for a student to build up some credits and get credit for what they have developed their skills in another language. But what to do if you've got a student who is failing? You got the mid-semester grades back and they are set to fail a class or they're not understanding. The earlier you find out, the better, generally, although sometimes you want to give a little time to see, is this just a blip, right? I had a conversation with someone recently about this. The student we were talking about was a student with an IEP, that individualized education plan for a student with a disability. And so in that case, you might have some additional potential people to call on to help troubleshoot this and figure out what's going on, right? But for any student, I think a first step that can be helpful, and maybe goes without saying, is just to figure out what's going on. Depending on the class, there can be various different reasons why a student is failing. Sometimes it starts by talking with the teacher and the student, looking at the grade book, pinning down, is this homework that has been done but not turned in, or turned in late and the grade dropped? Is it homework that was turned in but they didn't get the answers right, or they misunderstood the questions? Has it been tests that have come back poor? Has the student been missing this class frequently, either with unexcused or with excused absences? And so you start to pin down what is it that's contributing to the failing grade. Get that information as much as you can. And then looking beyond that if needed. Is it one class? Is it multiple classes? Is there something else going on? Has there been any issue at school, bullying or harassment? Have there been issues outside of school? Is there something that's, if indeed there have been absences, this could be a time to check in what's contributing to those. Sometimes if you have a student with an IEP and they're receiving specially designed instruction in one area, for example, in math or reading, you might start to see areas of concern come up. Beyond that, is it time to check back in? Especially as students move up from elementary to middle and high school, not only are they working with content, but they're also increasingly called upon to manage, organize, plan, follow through, set goals, all those kind of things that some people refer to those as a collection of executive functioning skills or organizational skills or study skills that are really called upon and can be a challenge. So is that an area of need for a student? As you check in with the teachers, with the student, with the school counselor, with the IEP team, if the student has an IEP or a 504 team, start by asking, do we have enough information to really answer why the student is not doing well? Do we need more of that information? For a student with an IEP, sometimes you'll have a conversation about whether you need to open an area for reevaluation or early reevaluation and figure out what you can try. Sometimes you might say, well, we're not sure, but we think we know enough to try something. We'll give it a shot. We'll come back together. So figure that out, make a plan, and then also make a plan to regroup, check back in and see how it worked. I hope these are things that sort of in that moment when you find out that a student is failing, it can be a moment of panic and fear, and then sort of just having that opportunity to sit down, make out a plan, have a step 1, 2, 3 can be really helpful. At the same time, you may take all these steps and not come up with a good answer, and you might be circling back around a couple times. It can be a good time to reach out for help, reach out again within the school building, up to the school district or outside of that, and try to see if you can problem solve. Hopefully for most kids, this will be a way to dig down, find the root of the issue and resolve it. For some students, it's going to be a longer haul to figure out what's going on, but staying in touch and close communication with folks at the school, with families, and finding out what's available can be helpful. If the student's in high school, again, don't forget that high school counselor. They can help keep on track for credits and credit opportunities to retrieve credits. All right. So again, risk of being a broken record, don't be shy about adding a Q&A or something on chat if you have a follow-up thought or question on any of these. And then as we give a little bit of time for that, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is some summertime. So a little bit earlier, we talked about some schools offer credit retrieval or credit recovery options during the summer. Some schools just offer standard summer programs for different grade levels and elementary enrichment. Sometimes they offer those by invitation to students who've been struggling to catch up to that grade level for reading, or students who are learning English and will need some extra time over the summer to keep building their language skills in the second language. So different schools have different summer school options. It's worth checking in with your school administrators, with the teacher, find out what's there. This slide identifies a different type of summer programming. It's called extended school year. And this is something that is particular to students with an IEP, an individualized education plan. And it is typically summer programming, but it can be other times of the year. This is just a quick review of it in case it's coming up. Extended school year, ESY, it's services beyond the school year that are provided in accord with the student's IEP at no cost. Sometimes we do around this time get questions around, what students are eligible for ESY. It's not every student with an IEP, but some students with an IEP are eligible for this ESY. It's continued services over the summer. And the question, as with most regarding IEPs, is one that has to be answered based on the individual student's needs. There's some guidelines and some considerations for the team. Again, it is an IEP team decision that is made about whether a student needs this in order to receive a free appropriate public education. In my mind, I sometimes think about it as if the student did not get these services over the summer, would it kind of make all the work done over the year, you'd lose that work that was done, you'd lose the benefit of it if you missed out on the summer services? One of the real common bases that we hear talked about for ESY is whether a student experiences regression and needs time for recoupment. And so that means, and it's not just a little regression. Regression is if they fall back, if they lose some of what they learned, they regress in their learning when they take a long break from it. Well, most of us do, right? We don't have it anymore in the front of our minds. We might have to relearn some of what we already learned when we come back after a break. And that's pretty typical. But some students experience a significant regression and take an extra long time to recoup, to relearn. If that's the case, and you've shown, for example, before spring break, the student had made a lot of progress, you take a week off and you have to take another week or a week and a half to relearn what they'd already learned, right? That would be regression and a need for recoupment. That's one of the more common bases that a student might be eligible for summer services. So if you were to take all that time off during the summer, you'd spend most of the fall redoing what you did over the spring, and you wouldn't be able to move forward. So that student might be getting some summer services through ESY, which would be documented on their IEP. But that's not the only basis for ESY eligibility. The rules explain, and here I have linked to the state special ed rule that addresses ESY. Other factors like the severity of the disability, the rate of progress, and emerging skills, right? Ultimately the question of, is this summer programming necessary for the student overall to access that free appropriate public education? These are issues that should be addressed within the IEP team, again, individualized. And in fact, sometimes you might have an IEP team that's looking at a student with 5 or 6 goal areas. There might be 3 or 4 of those that they really need to keep working on, or they're going to fall way behind. A couple others, they can take a break and come back. Right? So you might have it be pretty particularized in that decision. At the end of the day, the decision needs to be documented, reflected in the IEP, and also in the prior written notice, which would explain the reasons why the decision was reached, the information it was based on, and also give the information to the family, the parents, if they disagree with that decision, what their options are to dispute it or to raise a complaint about that. So I'm just checking in on my notes, and I'm checking in on our time. We are close to an hour. That really went by fast. I want to make sure that if you have further questions or thoughts, please go ahead and share them. I'm going to move us to our last slide and ask a of you that have participated, if you can take a few minutes and go to our webinar survey, Ask an Ombuds, and let us know if this was helpful, if you'd like more or not. I think it's a total of 4 questions. You can also just share your thoughts at oeoinfo@gov.wa.gov. It's right over here. You'll find our information on our website. Again, we will be posting this. If you can give us a little time on the post-production work for this, that would be great. We add closed captioning before we post them, so it might take us a little bit. And you can be in touch with us. Our next webinar will be on May 22nd. It's a Tuesday, and we're going to look at troubleshooting issues around special education, particularly for kids who live in foster care or with relatives in a kinship care situation. So that's going to be another lunchtime webinar on May 22nd. If you want to get notice of these events, you can sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. You can find us on Facebook, where we post information, and again, you can contact us by email at that OEO info. Ooh, I'm sorry. So someone had submitted a question about privacy on Google software that a school is using. Thank you for reminding, and the question of whether or not to opt out of that. I appreciate you raising that question, and I'm sorry we're short on time. So on that, and I will follow up directly. On that one as well, your question prompted me to do a little bit of looking, and indeed you're not alone in being concerned about student privacy. I don't have a specific answer. Again, this is something you might hear from ombuds, right? I can't say there's a yes, a no, an opt-out. I would expect that a school district would be able to give an option of doing things on paper, but I would also expect that as more and more schools use programs like Google Docs and other things, that that will be kind of the most efficient way for students. That doesn't mean that schools wouldn't also be able to make it so that students could participate without access to a computer. I mean, if you think about all the different ways that students engage and why different students might need a different alternative, I think they would be open to it. One of the things I would say is that, again, this is an issue where people around the state have been concerned. There's been some recent legislation to say we need schools to look at student privacy and the privacy of student information, especially when schools are contracting with providers. Now, I don't know that a general provider like Google would fall under that, but I will gather and send some specific information, at least where to go to continue with these questions. A question like this, we talked earlier about a different issue, but looking at the way the school systems are structured, it would start at the school building. If that isn't a place where it gets resolved, you can go up to the superintendent or district administrative level, to the school board, and then sometimes, even though they might not have particular investigation or enforcement authority, you'll often find helpful information, technical assistance, and guidance from our state Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And on some issues, they do have authority to investigate or enforce if they get a formal complaint. But on this issue of privacy rights of students, I think there's some more information and people who are engaged in this question and concerned about it as well. So how does that work? What would it look like for a student to opt out if you were concerned about privacy? And even just getting more information, if documents or records, or let's say a student's essay is uploaded to a program like that, where does the copy of that stay? Does the copy stay only briefly and then come back to the student? And so getting even just the further description of how that works. Because I do appreciate, definitely, children often put a lot into that and share a lot about themselves, and you want to know what's happening to it. Where is that information stored? Who might have access to it? What kind of access would they have? And so I will follow up with that. We have just 1 minute left, and I'm going to check over here. Any other questions? Again, we will post this recording. It might take us a little while to post it online. We'll share the materials online as well. And I really appreciate your participation. This ends our Ask an Ombuds lunchtime webinar series for 2017-2018. And as you have a moment, please do complete our survey. The link is there, and don't hesitate to be in touch with us. Thank you.